When one of Hank's records dropped into place on an automated turntable, even the initial rumble of the needle in the well-worn groove sounded lonesome. The crying steel guitar was the bait, but it was the beat that set the hook. And by the time Hank's voice crackled from the speaker, it was too late. There was no escaping now. No matter how struggles strive, I'll never get out of this world alive. Jesus Christ, that voice, that gut-wrenching, heart-rending wail that got down in your bones like a cold, wet day. The keening of a hillbilly banshee heralding imminent doom.
So these are 5 questions that we interview authors coming into the store. The first one is, what do you like best about touring for your book?
Oh, God, let's see. I don't know, touring for a book, you find out, if you do what I do for a living and you tour for a book, you find out that rock and roll, we know how to do this better than the book business does. It's one of those things, right? It's just I did it the first, I actually did a book tour with a bus once when my last book came out in paperback. We were just doing the South, and it was kind of a blast, but you know, the publishing business does it the way they do it in the record business. I tried to get the record company and the publisher to put together a tour together, but it seems like two collapsing industries could figure out how to support each other, but they couldn't do it. So I did a record tour, now I'm doing the book tour. So it's one of those deals.
I write topical songs. I write songs with an agenda sometimes, not all of them. You know, when I die, they will figure out I wrote way more songs about girls than I did about anything else. But, and I had an agenda when I wrote every one of them.
What is the last book you read and loved?
The last book that I read and loved would be The Lampshade by Mark Jacobson. He's actually a friend of mine, but I love that book. It's a nonfiction book. I read more nonfiction than I do fiction, but just because of paranoia about having an 8th grade education. Mark writes for the New Yorker. I mean, he writes for New York Magazine. He used to write for the New Yorker. He's like Esquire a lot. The book is about, Mark has a friend in New Orleans who ran across at a garage sale after Hurricane Katrina this lampshade that had been floating around New Orleans for years. And there were always stories about it, that it was a lampshade from a concentration camp in Germany. It was made of human skin. And this friend of Mark's just started freaking him out, sitting in his closet, so he sent it to Mark and said, "It's your problem now. You're the journalist. You figure out what it is." Mark got his magazine to pay for doing the DNA search, and it's human skin that was made in Germany in the 1930s. And the book's about him trying to track down where the lampshade really came from. And it reads like a detective novel, and it's really, really great. Great book.
There are some people that are going to stop buying books because they have a Kindle. Most of them aren't people that are going to an independent bookstore anyway. And that's the thing. That's the surprise. And, it's the community in the bookstore. It's
What is the first book that had a real impact on you?
Well, the books that got me reading were, so that's kind of an impact, were Robert Heinlein did a kid series called Space Cadets, and they were designed for kids, and I read those books when I was 7 or 8 years old and up, and then I ran out of Heinlein kids books, and I was in the library, and I ran across this book called Stranger in a Strange Land. It was the same author, and I read it, and it seriously, things started getting really weird from that point on. So Stranger in a Strange Land is a pretty big one. Science fiction is the reason that I started reading sort of above my level, and probably the only reason I'm not completely ignorant, because I ended up not finishing school, and so I owe a lot to science fiction.
I grew up here at the moment when Willie Nelson came back from Nashville. And I was at the Dripping Springs reunion. I was at the Abbott homecoming. I was at the first 2 4th of July picnics. And I was in Luckenbach long before that song, almost every weekend.
If you could have a meal with one literary character, who would it be and what would you eat?
One literary character. God, probably Frodo Baggins, and it would be breakfast, 2 or 3 breakfasts a day. So it's like, and the breakfast, and as far as I can tell on those books, are pretty much Irish breakfasts, which is my favorite cooked breakfast in the world.
Vinyl was the big surprise. We have, vinyl's come back, and it's really cool to get to be able to do the large format, artwork again, and I love it. But it's really, I've said this over and over again, we used to make records for girls, now we make them for nerds. It's like, you have to have all of the...
Go.
Why do you support indie bookstores?
Well, I think indie bookstores, indie record stores, it's like this thing is happening that none of us knows how it's going to end, there's sometimes I buy, like I do download books and I do download music, but I also still buy books. I need books for certain types of things, and some things, being able to get art books and being able to get, I think there's some kinds of kids books that really kind of only work when you can get your hands on them, and there's a whole lot of the process of learning to read. And I think the whole concept of sort of reinvention of a bookstore is community, as like the coffee house bookstore combination, I think is helping bookstores survive, and I'd hate to lose that, especially in the towns where it's like, for there not to be like a bookstore where you can get a cup of coffee, and maybe if you can't even afford to to buy or download the book, take a look at one and figure out what you're going to buy and what you're not, especially in like a college town, or that would be a shame to lose that. People thought record stores would be completely gone, and they're not. Those guys are figuring out that they're not, and I'm hoping bookstores are going to do the same thing, because it's kind of the same thing that's happening to this business that was happening to my day job, just about 4 or 5 years ago. So one right after the other.